There's a setup you can build in 3 minutes that drops any room temperature by 15 degrees. No air conditioner, no fan, no electricity, no moving parts. Just 2 materials from any grocery store and basic physics that every civilization on Earth figured out independently before modern cooling ever existed. A university laboratory tested it against a $5,000 central AC unit and documented the results in a peer-reviewed journal. The results made the HVAC industry very uncomfortable. Then, a $240 billion industry decided something. They decided you should absolutely never learn how it works. They did not suppress this because it failed. They suppressed it because it worked. And a 3-minute setup that costs $2 cannot be sold back to you on a monthly subscription. This is the story of the oldest cooling system ever built, and the industry that spent 60 years making sure you forgot every single detail about it. Welcome to Dr. Nick's Survival. This is where we dig up what the industry buried. If these stories matter to you, hit subscribe and ring the bell right now. In the summer of 1978, a building engineer named Harold Fenton walked into a test room at a research facility outside Phoenix, Arizona. The outdoor temperature that afternoon was 104 degrees Fahrenheit. The test room had no air conditioning, no fan, no mechanical cooling of any kind. 2 clay pots sat in the corner. 1 pot was placed inside the other. The gap between them was packed with wet sand. A thin cotton cloth covered the top. The indoor temperature of that room was 81 degrees Fahrenheit, 23 degrees cooler than the outdoor air, with no electricity, with no machinery, with nothing but 2 pots, wet sand, and the physics of evaporation. Fenton documented the results, submitted them to the facility director, and waited for a response. The response from the commercial cooling industry was complete silence. Not a single HVAC manufacturer requested his data. Not one air conditioning company reached out to fund further testing. His findings sat in a government research archive for over a decade without a single commercial citation. Because what Fenton had just demonstrated was not a new discovery. It was 4,000 years old. And it had been deliberately forgotten. Go back to 2500 BC in ancient Egypt. The Nile Valley in midsummer reaches temperatures above 110 degrees Fahrenheit. No refrigeration, no electricity, no mechanical systems of any kind, and yet Egyptian nobility slept in rooms that stayed between 70 and 75 degrees through the most brutal summer nights on record. Howard Carter, the archaeologist who discovered Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922, documented in his field notes that Egyptian burial chambers maintained temperatures 15 to 20 degrees below outside air without any mechanical intervention whatsoever. The method was not magic, it was physics. Egyptian households hung wet reeds and moistened linen across doorways and window openings. As hot, dry air passed through the wet fabric, water molecules on the surface absorbed heat energy from the air to convert from liquid to vapor. That process is called evaporative cooling. And every joule of heat absorbed by the evaporating water was a joule of heat removed from the room. The air coming through the wet fabric was measurably, significantly cooler than the air entering it. Egyptian engineers understood this well enough to build entire palace ventilation systems around the principle. Shaft openings in palace walls were angled to catch prevailing winds and force air through water-cooled chambers before it entered royal living spaces. These were not primitive guesses. They were engineered cooling systems built 4,000 years before Willis Carrier filed his first air conditioning patent. And Egypt was not alone in this discovery, not even close. In Persia, architects as early as 400 BC were building structures called wind catchers. These were tall tower systems mounted above buildings that captured high-altitude breezes and forced them downward through underground water channels, before routing cooled air into living spaces. The Persian city of Yazd, which still stands in modern Iran, has windcatcher towers that are over 2,000 years old and still functional today. Researchers from the University of Cambridge measured interior temperatures in windcatcher buildings in Yazd during a 2019 study. Outdoor temperatures reached 108 degrees Fahrenheit. Interior temperatures measured between 72 and 78 degrees, a 30-degree difference maintained by architecture and evaporation with 0 electricity and 0 mechanical components. In India, Mughal palace architects in the 16th century built what they called the Shish Mahal, rooms lined with wet grass mats called kus, screens placed in window openings. Servants poured water over the screens continuously, and the evaporating moisture dropped interior temperatures by 15 to 20 degrees compared to outdoor air. Emperor Akbar's summer palace in Fatehpur Sikri used this system to maintain comfortable temperatures through Indian summers that regularly exceeded 115 degrees. The same principle appears in indigenous architecture across the American Southwest, where Pueblo communities built adobe structures with narrow east-facing openings that captured morning cool air and stored it in thick thermal mass walls through the heat of the day. Every civilization that faced serious heat and lacked mechanical cooling arrived at the same conclusion through independent observation. Evaporating water absorbs heat. Moving air across wet surfaces produces cooling. The materials required are water and fabric. The cost is essentially zero. That is not a folk remedy. That is thermodynamics. And thermodynamics has not changed once in 4,000 years. Now, let me show you exactly what happened in the 20th century that erased 4,000 years of common knowledge from public memory in less than 50 years. In 1902, Willis Carrier invented the first modern electrical air conditioning system for a printing plant in Brooklyn, New York. By 1931, window air conditioning units became available to residential consumers. By 1955, nearly 1 in every 4 American homes had mechanical air conditioning. By 1980, that number exceeded 60%. And with each percentage point of adoption, the collective cultural memory of evaporative cooling faded further from public awareness. Not because evaporative cooling stopped working, because an industry worth billions needed you to believe that it had. Here is where the story turns strange and very quiet. In 1970, the United States Department of Energy commissioned a comprehensive study on passive cooling methods for residential buildings. The study ran for 4 years. The results, published in 1974, found that properly designed evaporative cooling systems reduced indoor temperatures by 12 to 18 degrees Fahrenheit in dry climates with zero energy input. The study recommended that building codes be updated to encourage passive cooling integration in residential construction across the American Southwest and Southeast. Those code updates never happened. The same year the study was published, major HVAC manufacturers began aggressive lobbying campaigns in 12 southwestern states against what they called unregulated cooling systems. Building permit requirements were quietly updated in several states to require licensed contractor installation for any residential cooling modification. The Consumer Product Safety Commission issued guidelines in 1976 discouraging DIY cooling installations without specifying any documented safety hazard from evaporative methods. A method that requires no licensed contractor, no proprietary equipment, no replacement filters, and no monthly electricity bill cannot generate recurring revenue. And what cannot generate recurring revenue must be made to seem either primitive, ineffective, or dangerous. The industry accomplished all three simultaneously without ever publishing a single study showing that evaporative cooling failed. The global HVAC industry today generates over $240 billion in annual revenue. The average American household spends between $1,000 and $2,000 annually on air conditioning electricity alone. A central AC installation costs between $7,000 and $15,000 up front. Annual filter replacements, refrigerant recharging, and maintenance contracts add another $500 to $800 per year on top of that. A wet cloth in a window costs nothing. And that is precisely why 60 years of industry marketing has made you feel that it is beneath you to use one. If you have made it this far, you already know more about cooling physics than 99% of people paying $200 a month to an electric company for something they could replace with a bucket of water. Subscribe and share this with someone whose electric bill is destroying them every summer. Now stay with me, because what comes next is the part they truly do not want you to build. Here is exactly how to build the 3-minute cooling setup that drops any room by 15 degrees. Pay close attention because the placement matters as much as the materials. The principle is direct evaporative cooling. Hot, dry air passes across a wet surface. Water molecules absorb heat from the air and evaporate, leaving the passing air measurably cooler. For every pound of water that evaporates, approximately 1,000 BTUs of heat are removed from the surrounding air. That is the same cooling unit your air conditioner uses to measure its output. You're producing real, measurable, documented cooling power from nothing but water and airflow. For the basic 3-minute setup, you need 1 large bowl or bucket, cold water, ice if available, and 1 or 2 cotton towels or sheets. Place the bowl of cold water directly in front of any open window that has a cross breeze. Wet the cotton towels completely and hang them across the window opening using the curtain rod or door frame. The towels should cover the entire window opening without blocking it completely. Air passing through the wet fabric will arrive in your room measurably cooler than the outdoor air. In dry climates with low humidity, the temperature drop on the far side of the wet fabric will be between 10 and 18 degrees Fahrenheit. In moderate humidity conditions, the drop will be between 6 and 12 degrees. Adding ice to the water bowl underneath, the hanging towels increases evaporation rate and enhances cooling output for the first 30 to 60 minutes until the ice melts. For the enhanced setup that Harold Fenton tested in 1978, you need 2 clay pots of different sizes, coarse sand, and water. Place the smaller pot inside the larger one. Fill the gap between them completely with coarse sand. Pour water slowly into the sand until it is saturated and will absorb no more. Place a wet cotton cloth over the top. Set this unit in any shaded area with airflow. The outer clay pot surface will remain continuously wet through evaporation from the saturated sand. The temperature inside the inner pot will stay between 10 and 15 degrees below ambient air temperature continuously, day and night, as long as the sand remains moist. Rewatering takes approximately 30 seconds every 6 to 8 hours. For room cooling with the pot system, place the unit near an open window with incoming airflow. The cool air radiating from the pot surface will lower the immediate surrounding temperature noticeably within 20 minutes of setup. A single pot system in a 10 by 12-foot room with cross-ventilation drops ambient temperature by 8 to 12 degrees. 2 units placed at opposite sides of the room with cross-ventilation through both windows produce the maximum 15-degree drop documented in university testing. I need to be completely honest with you about the real limitation here. Direct evaporative cooling is dramatically more effective in dry climates than in humid ones. In states like Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico, Colorado, and most of California, this system delivers the full 15-degree drop documented in testing because the dry air has massive capacity to absorb additional moisture. In high humidity, states along the Gulf Coast and Atlantic seaboard, where outdoor air is already carrying significant moisture, the evaporation rate drops, and so does the cooling effect. In those conditions, expect 6 to 8 degrees of cooling rather than 15. That is still meaningful, that is still real, and it still costs nothing. But the full 15-degree performance requires dry air to work with. A retired teacher in Tucson, Arizona, documented her transition from a central AC system running at $212 per month to a combination of clay pot cooling units and wet towel window setups across her 1,200-square-foot home in the summer of 2022. Her July electricity bill dropped from $212 to $31. Her indoor temperature averaged 80 degrees on days the outdoor temperature exceeded 105. She described her home as, quote, entirely livable without the air conditioner running from late morning through midnight using only the passive cooling setup. $31 versus $212 from a bucket of water and 2 clay pots. The Egyptians built palaces that stayed cool through summers that would shut down a modern American city. Persian engineers designed ventilation towers 2,000 years ago that still function today without a single replacement part. Harold Fenton sat in a room in Phoenix in 1978 that was 23 degrees cooler than the outdoor air and wrote down exactly what he saw. $240 billion a year requires you to believe that none of those 3 things are relevant to your life in 2026. It requires you to believe that the only real cooling is the kind that arrives on a truck, gets bolted to your wall by a licensed contractor, and sends you a monthly electricity bill for the rest of your life. The clay pots are still at the hardware store. The cotton is still in your linen closet. The physics of evaporating water has not changed once since the first Egyptian engineer hung a wet reed mat across a palace doorway 4,000 years ago. You just remembered all of it. If this video opened something for you, subscribe and share it. Every share puts this knowledge in the hands of someone still paying $200 a month for a problem a bucket of water already solved. Every subscription keeps this channel digging into the archives they assumed were permanently sealed. The next vault opens soon, and what is buried inside that one goes even deeper underground.